Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the MCA webinar. Today we're going to be hearing from Howard Coleman. I just want to remind you all that you are on mute. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box on the right-hand corner of your screen. And Howard has an allotted time at the end where he will go through all of those questions that you have. Without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Howard.
Thank you very much, McCall. I always wondered what a do was, but whatever. Again, hello, everyone. My name, as McCall mentioned, is Howard Coleman, and I'm a principal of MCA Associates. For those of you that don't know us, we're a management consulting firm. We have been since 1986. And we focus on and work with clients who are committed to excellence. Before we start, I'd like to, of course, thank the folks at Virtual Rain for making the time available today. And even more importantly, I hope you'll conclude that the time was well spent. Secondly, if you didn't attend the Virtual Rain annual meeting last fall, I guess it was, or haven't previously reviewed the videotape that was provided by Virtual Rain that's posted on YouTube, I would urge you to do so. I was invited to the event last year. I was supposed to be speaking, and unfortunately I had a medical situation which precluded me from getting on an airplane. So my point in asking you to kind of review that video again is because there's an important gentleman right at the beginning who spoke to some of the issues that I was going to speak to. His name is Lowell Caulfold. Lowell is the CEO of CPS Distributors out in the Denver, Colorado area. And for purposes of course, of full disclosure, I should mention that CPS Distributors is a client of ours. But more importantly, Lowell did, I believe, a real masterful job of summarizing some of the things that I was going to talk about. And he did a masterful job, I believe, in explaining in pretty practical terms, from his own company perspective, some of the benefits that his company was able to realize by reevaluating their whole stock replenishment network. In other words, thinking through the pros and cons in terms of increasing the number of products being replenished through their central distribution center. And you'll see also that Lowell chose to discuss the issue really from two different perspectives, which I would suggest you keep in mind. And we'll be talking more about them today. Firstly, how they have been able to increase the frequency of replenishment to their individual branches based on their own particular branch geography and the impact, the positive impact it had on customer service, their inventory levels, and inventory accuracy. Secondly, he discussed the impact on branch labor requirements, including the impact on the selling activities, which the branch has responsibility for, and questioning the viability of asking branch people to be warehouse people. It's kind of important. So I urge you to spend maybe 10 minutes right at the beginning of the video. That's about all it takes. And it's, again, right at the beginning, and I believe you'll find it pretty worthwhile. So I call this webinar today the pros and cons of centralized distribution versus a vendor direct to a branch, because I don't believe there is an absolutely right or wrong, wrong way here. So if anyone here today is looking for a recommendation relative to their company, or some very, very specific recommendation, it's not that easy. One really has to look at the individual company, and but there are some very important considerations, I think, that can lead you in the right directions for your company. Now, I will tell you at a very personal opinion level, and I'll be very upfront with you in this, and tell you that if you are not looking or haven't looked at some degree of central distribution, then you may be doing a disservice to your company. It's a very interesting topic. There's a lot of chatter about it, there's a lot of thinking about it, a lot of verbiage about it. And some of it, I think, comes from what I often call thought silos. That is people thinking within their own opinion, within their own silo, and they're only willing to understand what they're already familiar with doing. So it's always seemed to me, this whole topic has always seemed to me to be a very much of an age-old question, which doesn't have a very clear, well-defined, and definitive answer most of the time. In fact, I don't believe the choices necessarily are mutually exclusive, because often the answer that we often come up with is some form of hybridization. That is, some hybridization of central distribution and vendor direct to branch. So I will tell you there may be a conundrum here for each of you to rationalize as you listen today and as you think more about it, that you need to ask the question of yourself, what do I know versus what do I need to know to come up with the best options for my particular company? Now, I think you would all agree that surely there's a certain commonality in the factors that one has to consider, regardless of whether you have strong feelings about pro or con regarding central distribution, or strong feelings pro or con about vendor direct to branch. And there are a number of factors to consider when attempting to develop a direction one way or the other, or maybe even resulting in some of this hybridization of thinking. In either case, one has to consider the suppliers and vendors that they do business with. You surely have to think about your own physical facilities, the geography of where you are, where your locations are, and what I like to call the operational readiness of each location in terms of whether they're going to be destined to handle vendor direct or centralized distribution. There are lead time issues. Sometimes the lead times differ, or that consideration has to be considered when considering central distribution or vendor direct. Demand forecasts, the ability to forecast however it is you forecast, whether you have some embedded in your software, some moving averages or some more sophisticated algorithms, if you will. We all know that within forecasts, there's inherent demand variability. There's always error within any forecast. There's always error within any prognostication, if you will. Another commonality is the safety stock impact. Because we have forecast error, it in fact impacts our safety stocks. There may be variability within our lead times. That will impact our safety stocks if we're doing it correctly. Often, when we consider central distribution versus vendor direct, we have to look at the order sizes that we place, the purchase order, size of the orders that we place in terms of the quantities of each individual line item. That's a very important consideration in terms not only of our inventory levels, but how our systems react and how it can help us lean one way or the other between central distribution and vendor direct. And of course, you have to understand your customers. You have to understand what value proposition there is out there that you want to be able to deliver to your customer in terms of customer service, on-time delivery, order accuracy, and so on. And I can tell you there are probably a host of other trade-offs one has to consider between both of the options, and most of them fall within the attributes of time and taken me a bit, I guess, to kind of get to the real agenda today, but here we are. So our agenda today is to discover and discuss some practical practice considerations that may lead to some conclusions and direction for you, because some of these practice considerations ultimately may be your specific critical success factors, the things that break down the wall in terms of which direction you go to. Now, we're going to find as we review some of these today that some are quantitative, some are qualitative, and some, depending on your company circumstances, may have more relevance to you or maybe even more bang for the buck importance to you. So we'll be drilling down to these as we go along. So just to kind of go through them quickly, in terms of what we're going to discuss the impact of the product's physical characteristics, and in terms of how that might lean us one way or the other. We'll talk a bit about freight terms and transportation issues. We're going to talk quite a lot today about stock transfers, which comes up really more in the central distribution arena, but it's something we should understand in terms of how it impacts our inventory, how it impacts service, and how it fits into our selling geography, the areas in which we service. We're going to talk about materials handling today, and the people we rely on, the staff that we rely on to be able to move product throughout our company, and the types of core competencies that we have to evaluate, which might lean us towards one alternative or the other. We'll talk about demand forecasting and how we have to go about managing our demand, because we know every product has some forecast error associated with it. I do think, as a general statement, that we, that is the collective we, that is those of us in wholesale distribution, have tended to take a black or a white approach to this issue. And that's what at least seems to me to reside in our collective operational DNA, our collective wisdom, if we will. So I think this is why I believe that there are some very important practice considerations, some additional ones. There's what I call product speed of flow. We'll describe that a little bit later. But it's really how fast product moves through your distribution network. If you chose a central distribution model, there is what I call a mission conversion cost. That is, the facility that's chosen to be the central distribution center has to have some specific capability attributes. We'll talk about the costs and efficiencies of transportation and delivery management options and how we might be able to maximize those under the two alternatives. And I think we even throw in a couple of other ones that that we'll get to today also. So the first two I want to discuss with you have to do with products' physical characteristics. That is, product size, weight, cube, etc. And secondly, the whole issue of this is a topic I'd love to talk about is freight terms and transportation, particularly when we have prepaid freight terms, because I think there's a certain degree of oversimplification in that particular attribute. So when we talk about product physical characteristics, we're talking about, are we handling things like pipe, or are we handling large reels of wire? I have many clients in the HVAC area, heating and air conditioning area, that have rooftop air conditioners for large buildings that they store, and they surely don't want to be moving that around too much. So that often is a product that they'll have shipped directly to wherever the point of sale is supposed to be, and not do a lot of double handling of it. And the same might go for the wire, and the same may go for PVC pipe or copper tubing or whatever. But of course, we have the other things like small fittings, where size, weight, or cube is not normally an issue. But when folks discuss this issue, when folks discuss this what I like to call hub and spoke, central distribution, versus direct to the branch, product physical characteristics is always a consideration that gets raised due to what's perceived as a double handling concern. Why do I want to order this stuff, move it into a central distribution center, and then ultimately send it back to a branch to refill their inventory? And I can tell you, in some of these products, it's a legitimate concern. Again, weight, cube, there's material handling requirements that are involved, maybe specific equipment that you have to possess, but often this double handling issue gets conflated. What I can tell you, at least in my opinion, it also has to be considered along with how we're able to meet our speed of flow objectives. And if you recall our last webinar, we talked a lot about that, where we discussed a variety of ways we can process an order, assuming we have the appropriate operational and business processes in place that can actually offset what might be perceived as the negatives of double handling in central distribution center networks. So what I'm saying here is that the double handling argument with lots of products, not all, but with lots of products, that I often hear as a rejection of central distribution, doesn't always hold water, doesn't always hold water all the time, in my opinion. Now, when folks discuss, let's say, prepaid freight, maybe even regardless of what the quantity ordered is, and our vendors are willing to send the product to us prepaid, send it to as many locations as we want, it's surely a major consideration in terms of the route or the alternatives we use in terms of our distribution network. And it's one I think is often pretty much seen as a no-brainer. You know, wow, I mean, that's great. We get prepaid. The vendor will send it anywhere we want. And I can tell you maybe that's right sometimes. But I suggest also that maybe it oversimplifies, because there are inventory, cost, and labor factors regardless of where you send the product. There are network inventory, cost, and labor factors for each of the distribution network alternatives, and we need to understand what those are. So these considerations have to be analyzed and completely, let's call them unpacked, unraveled, and we shouldn't be necessarily accepting the conventional wisdom or a generalized approach. Stock transfers is another area that often gets conflated, because somehow it goes to this question of this double handling issue. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the impacts of a timely and scheduled stock transfer process and how that impacts the frequency of replenishment when we're discussing a distribution network where we're shipping product from a vendor into a central distribution center and then at the appropriate time to a specific branch, because it does impact our whole speed of flow equation, and it does impact inventory levels. We'll talk also about the appropriate material handling equipment and material handling process core competencies that are involved in being able to handle a central distribution network, and really beginning to ask the question, where do and should the greatest work or task competencies be? Where should those most skillful people reside? So I would ask you, and you can answer this question, I guess, when we go through the Q&A today. Do you think there is an advantage to a scheduled and timely stock transfer process under a central distribution network where we have a single manageable delivery of many products to a branch from a central distribution center versus separate or individual deliveries coming from various suppliers over periods of time. Now, of course, geography plays a large part of this. Distances may impact our frequency of transfer. But one thing we know for sure is that increasing the frequency of replenishment, and this is most likely done better under a CDC, under a central distribution center concept, that increasing the frequency of replenishment positively impacts speed of flow and inventory levels. So we have then some ability to begin to impact our lead times, our safety stocks, and our economic order quantities or reorder quantities, whatever term we choose to use to describe those order quantities. And typically within a central distribution or hub and spoke arrangement, we have a lot more control over our ability to reduce lead times and safety stocks, as opposed to having a vendor to branch distribution network where we have all these longer lead times, and as a result of longer lead times, we need to apply great amounts of safety stock. So this brings up an interesting picture, one that I call my infamous picture. Some people call it famous, but sometimes some people call it infamous. My infamous picture that I think is worth 1,000 words. So keeping in mind what we've said so far, let's talk a little bit about the frequency and the timeliness of central distribution stock transferring. Now, you're going to see this picture probably a couple of times today. It's very pertinent to our discussion and I think to the direction you're ultimately going to take. And you'll see some differences between this left side and this right side. The left side versus the right side, you can see the differences. There are longer order cycles, that is time between orders, and that typically happens when you have a vendor to branch operation. With central distribution, you will typically be able to control better the frequency of replenishment. And look at the major difference here. There's actually two or three of them. One, average inventory will tend to be lower. And the time, the interval between orders, that is the interval between the peaks and the valleys, is typically longer or a greater number of days or maybe even weeks with vendor direct versus CDC. That time, that difference between this period and these smaller periods when we have more frequent replenishment, in fact, is an opportunity for a stock up. The difference between the left side and the right side of this picture, on the right side, there's an opportunity for lower average inventory, less chance for stock out during a replenishment cycle. Now, is there a conflict here? You know, what I call a chronic conflict? Well, maybe, maybe not. You know, there are two leading sets of operations and supply chain management approaches which have gained momentum over the years. And you're probably most familiar with the first. And the first one is based on predicting future demand. Our system has its way, depending on whatever software you have, to be able to throw out some projections of what it thinks we're going to sell, so the inventory system and the procurement system can react accordingly. The second one, which is not quite so popular, but easily meshed with the first, is based on more reaction to current demand. That is being more driven by actual demand. Boy, that kind of raises all kinds of mind-bending questions, doesn't it? And particularly a lot of challenges to the conventional wisdom in inventory and supply chain management. I can tell you both arguments are solid, both are correct, but don't have to lead to some type of a conflict. Now, I'll find that most people who speak against one or the other of these views or these methods do so because they just happen to know their own thinking better, and have not yet mastered the countering model. So at a basic level, at a very basic level, we can impact inventory levels. Central distribution does foster the ability to have more frequent replenishment, increases the speed of product flow, and protects us against those periods where there's forecast or demand variance. And I know you all have to contend with that, particularly for those of you who are in the purchasing, procurement, or inventory management area. It can react better to demand forecast variance. So let's talk a little bit about this demand thing, this forecast variance thing. Now, here's what I can tell you with a very high degree of assurance. Lower safety stock, there's a lower safety stock potential with central distribution versus what is often a safety stock redundancy at a branch. Why? Because each branch is kind of acting like within its own silo. Each location is protecting itself against stock up, protecting itself against its own demand variability, its own forecast error. Again, it's like each branch thinking within its own silo. So forecast variance at the branch is often higher. Forecast variance under CDC is often lower, and I'm going to show you that right now. So here's where the real facts of life exist, and I think the facts of life that we have to consider. And this is where we really got to think about this and challenge the traditional thinking between where central distribution is appropriate and where vendor direct branch is appropriate. So I'm going to ask you to consider this statement. The lower the level of aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. Let me say it again. The lower the level of aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. In other words, the question of how much demand we'll have, for instance, at the distribution center level, at our central distribution level, will typically provide a better forecasting answer than trying to answer the question, how much of this will I sell at a specific location? And let me describe this for you. So I have these, in my picture here, I have 5 different branches. These set of numbers below, the number to the left of the slash is the forecast. The number to the right of the slash is what we actually sold. So you can see, and I haven't made these numbers up to make it look worse than what it might be. I mean, these are some pretty typical examples, very frankly. But you can see here, we forecast 100, we sold 50. We forecast here 50, we sold 100, and on and on and on. So you can see we've got some pretty major forecast variance at each branch, and each branch is trying to protect itself against its own forecast error. So just do this. Aggregate these numbers. Add up all these, all the forecasts. Then add up all the actuals. And what you get at the distribution center level is a much more reasonable forecast than actual. You can see in total, company-wide, we forecast 500 for the period, and we actually sold 490. Not bad. I wish we had that all the time. So what I can tell you is this is just nothing more than a statistical truth. And to me, it's one of the reinforcing attributes, or one of the reinforcing factors as to why you should, in my opinion, be looking more at central distribution, particularly if you haven't up to this point in time. It can help you with the whole stockout situation and the inventory levels, and being more assured that what you're ordering is more in line with what the customer wants. And of course, when it's on at a central distribution, at a distribution center, branches can get this stuff through a stock transfer. And typically, the branches are a lot closer to the distribution center under a central distribution mode than they are to a particular vendor who sells that product, and we try to order it vendor direct with a longer lead time involved, more inventory involved, more safety stock involved. Because the major component here in terms of the inventory level impact is that dreaded safety stock. So it's always seemed to me to be what many companies do here when using a vendor direct is that there's a compromise going on, and that compromise has very good reasons for it, and it's to protect sales. And I surely understand that, having come from your from wholesale distribution, and it's also what's got into our DNA. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't forecast anymore. All I am suggesting is that you minimize the negative consequences of the inherent variability that's in any forecast, so that where inventory is, and here at the distribution center, where it resides becomes more important than how much inventory you have. Again, though, the primary point here is that there are some definite facts of life to recognize as part of your overall thought process about whether you should have more centralized distribution, continue what you're doing, or maybe lean almost 100% towards vendor direct. And we're going to be, in fact, in August, we're going to be talking more about this in our last webinar. And we'll be talking about some of the other opportunities that exist also. Oh, so we're back to my picture, my infamous picture worth 1,000 words. And I bring it up again because it's very interesting. When I referenced earlier that you should take a look at the video that Virtual Rain posted on YouTube, where Lowell Caulfold is trying to explain some of the things that I was supposed to be there to explain. This was an area that he and I really went back and forth on when we were started our consulting relationship, if you will. And he said to me, you know, Howard, he says, what you seem to be fostering here is some type of sell one, buy one philosophy. That is, every time we sell a product, every time we sell a unit, that you want some stuff at the central distribution center to come right back to that branch almost instantaneously or as quickly as possible. And he kind of put it within the context of, I think the expression he used, the tooth fairy. The tooth fairy was going to magically replace this product. What Lowell understood in reality very well, that what I was describing there was really kind of seeking the ideal. But he recognized the truth of it. He got the fact that if we have more bite-sized transfers through central distribution in terms of quantity and frequency, that would result in a branch's inventory being closer to actual demand, and that the objective could be most easily accomplished through central distribution. And a stock transfer process where it makes sense, as well as gaining some additional advantages along the way in terms of accuracy, and Lowell could go on ad infinitum about how it allowed them to manage their people better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A few more practice considerations. And this is based on, I've been doing what I've been doing for, close to 30 years. I hate to admit it, but it's about 30 years now. And one of the findings, things I discover in working in this area with wholesale distributors is often that there's a more qualitative issue here. And it's also a bit on the subjective side. And that is that some of the reluctance to move from a central distribution, or at least engage in some respect with central distribution, is partially a result of local managers, local branch managers, and I love all branch managers, by the way, that local branch managers demonstrate a reluctance. And there's a desire, there's a strong bias, as you might expect, for higher inventories, a strong bias for having product that I can see. It's visually present, right? And if it's not visually present in the quantities that I think they should be, I'm not going to be very comfortable with that. And it's really part of this historical subjective reasoning that's going on over the years. You might also, when you're reviewing Lowell's comments, listen to what he has to say about this, because it also brought up the question that he raised, which was, what do I want my branch people doing? He says, I expect them to sell. It's a counter operation. They have some trucks that may make local deliveries and so on. But basically, it's a counter and inside sales operation. He says, do I want them to be the experts in warehousing? Or should those people reside in a central distribution location and I transfer that material to the branch each and every day or every couple of days, depending on your own particular geography, as opposed to worrying about vendor stuff coming in from vendors, helter-skelter, having to check it all in, and doing some of the other additional paperwork that's necessary on a vendor direct versus a very simple stock transfer that's received on a scheduled basis. So his question, I think a very, very valid one, is what do I want my branch people to be doing? When I've always said to them that their mission is to sell, is to increase revenue at their particular location. Now, there are some other practice considerations. If anyone from here on out gives consideration to central distribution center model, then there are some costs of that, what I call is the cost of conversion, to assure that that the appropriate physical facility is staffed and manned, has the right types of equipment, both in terms of storage equipment, materials handling equipment, has the appropriate warehouse management systems, software, and the appropriate integration. Another aspect of this, and we find this consistently in companies that begin to migrate towards some percentage of central distribution, is that they very quickly get a better control over their transportation and cost controls, better control over their routing, their vehicle capacity utilization, come up with more fine-tuned frequencies of delivery to their customers, and particularly to their branches for replenishment. So that's not a kind of an add-on comment. It's real life in terms of what companies have been able to realize and being able to demonstrate once they accept and begin to engage and put their arms around the concept of central distribution. So, after having said all this today, I guess I would also say that there's no easy answer. And I guess I kind of alluded to that early on. But what we have is a requirement to consider these major practice considerations. Again, what some of them, which may become your critical success factors, and understand how they affect or will affect your decision-making process in terms of which direction you continue or which direction you go, and ultimately how it impacts your company, and how it lends itself towards understanding the pros and cons here, lends itself towards a balanced rationale and what the right thing is for your particular company. So your takeaways today, I would suggest that you have to think about and understand what your strategy is that you're going to adopt in terms of these viable approaches, and they're both viable, central distribution and vendor direct, they're both viable under the right practice considerations. And many companies end up with some type of hybrid solution depending on those considerations. There are other factors to consider that we talked about today. How fast product moves through your facilities and the ease in which it moves, how we can make inventory more efficient and less of it, how we can improve our demand forecast accuracy, and we know forecast error is inherent. We can control that better through CDC, and I can guarantee you that would be the case. Just read any Inventory Management 101 book, and you'll see what they have to say about it also. Safety stock and possible lead time reduction opportunities, better scaling and utilization of personnel and equipment resources. In fact, at CPS, they were able to begin changing their manpower in terms of when their manpower works, what times of the day they work. Most wholesale distributors that we're working with right now no longer are working 7:30 to 5. They have extended hours and in some cases actual night shifts where specific activities occur. Transfers being one of those activities. And then overall, making sure that our ability to distribute product to both our external customers and our internal customers, the branches, is handled by the people who have the greatest core competencies, the most experience, and can do it the most accurately, because that's what they're charged with, and that's what they're responsible for. So, at this point, I'd like to, open up the time we have available, and I still think we have about 15 minutes or so to any questions and answers. Well, I'll provide the answers, hopefully. You provide the questions. Well, can you open this up?
Yes, so I don't see any questions so far, so we'll give them a second to type them in and see what they have for us, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so we have a question from Bryce Bosquet, and he says, what is considered too far or too long for CDC?
Too far or too long from a branch?
It doesn't say. Yes.
Is he talking travel distance?
Yes.
Typically, most of my clients, once they get beyond 150 miles each way, typically it's a little less than that, but the absolute max is 150 miles each way before they begin to say, CDC may not be the best route here. We might want to maintain or increase vendor to branch direct. One of the other things that they might consider would be to not plan to do that every day, but plan to promise a vendor a branch delivery of replenishment inventory every maybe 2 or 3 times a week as a way of cutting down on the travel time and the overall cost of doing that.
Okay. And Tim Cleary asks, in the CDC model, with the thought that the branch personnel are not inventory and warehouse experts, who develops the replenishment orders, CEDC or branches?
Well, in this particular case, and typically under a central distribution center, your obviously your computer system has a lot to say with this because it has to know where the demand is going to be calculated from. So it would emanate the replenishment orders, the transfers to the branches. Those transfer quantities would normally be based on central distribution center demand. And that usually is overseen by whoever your supply chain or purchasing person is. It varies in different companies, like there's 100 different ways, but it's typically whoever's in charge of inventory management or supply chain.
Okay, I don't see any more questions.
Okay, well, let me kind of sum up. I'm still open for some questions if some come along the way in the next few minutes. So let me take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us today and listening. I want to thank again the folks at Virtual Rain for asking me to do this, and I'm looking forward to our next session. I believe it's sometime toward the end of August, and this one's kind of a mixture of some various topics. It's entitled Managing the Inventory in Service Level Drivers, plus some other things that probably drive you crazy. So that's the title. I'd like to take an opportunity to offer you one of our recent white papers. All you have to do is send me an email at hcoleman@mcaassociates.com that you see up there on the screen, and I'll be happy to send you our white paper. It's called Say Hello to Mr. Pareto. I think you all know who Mr. Pareto is, and I'd be happy to send that along to you. There's no obligation. I'm not going to call you and try to sell you or anything. I'm just happy to be able to share the information with you. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found some of it valuable. It's a difficult but important subject.
Thank you, Howard. We do have one more question.
All right, go right ahead.
Okay, Jared Vanderbush asked, how important is it that your CDC is located central to all branches?
Obviously, that would be the ideal, but that's not necessarily the case, particularly as companies get larger and expand their geographics. And that might be through organic growth in the company or through acquisitions, and they pick up somebody else's branches along the way. But I think as long as it stays within that 150 mile radius, if you will, or one-way travel, then it really doesn't matter one way or the other.
All right. That is all the questions that I can see right now. If you guys have questions, I'm sure Howard would be happy to email them or answer them through email. anytime. So we're going to end this webinar now. Thanks for everyone who attended, and thank you so much, Howard,
All
for
right,
your
thanks
presentation
again, everyone,
today.
and thanks, McCall, for coordinating this.
Mm-hmm.
All right, have a great day, people.
You too. Bye-bye.